Hey, I hope you stick around. I have a topic today I'm going to be covering with one of my guests on microsegmentation. So if you're interested in this, if you'd like to learn, and I'll bet a lot of you do want to learn more about microsegmentation, stay with us. I think you're going to enjoy the video. I've got a real icon in the field, and he's going to share a lot with you. So stick around. Hi, this is Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with a friend of mine, James Weinbrenner, who is the CEO of a company called Elicity. And we're going to learn from James about microsegmentation and some issues in cloud and ransomware. You're going to like it. A lot to learn here, so I hope you stay with us. James, welcome. Nice to see you.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for hosting.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Hey, listen, let's start. Why don't we just start with just a brief summary of what you guys do at Elicity. Then I want to get into tech and some of your background. You've been at this for a while. I think there's a lot we can learn from you. But tell us about the company.
Sure. So the company is about 3 years old, and we are focused on delivering an identity-based microsegmentation platform to make it very easy for organizations to start moving towards least privilege access across all of the managed and unmanaged devices in their networks.
Now you're selling to enterprise, right? There's mostly businesses that are buying this type of thing.
Yes. We started out actually working through COVID with folks that continued to have to run their operations. So we were working a lot on the operational technology and critical infrastructure side with pharmaceuticals and some life sciences that were very concerned about security in their manufacturing facilities. Significant use cases in clinical healthcare delivery organizations. And now as things are opening back up, we're starting to see even more interest in more traditional kind of enterprise carpeted space use cases as well.
It's probably a combination of cloud and hybrid and premise. Like in healthcare, it's the ultimate hybrid. But I have that right? It's kind of a mix of cloud and
absolutely, because if you think about the traffic profiles, we've moved from sort of all of the traffic being on-prem towards traffic from campus or manufacturing sites back to a centralized data center. To now, we have a mix of legacy data center workloads as well as certainly cloud workloads, and with the cloud workloads growing faster and faster.
That's good. Well, we're going to get into microsegmentation because I know a lot of people watching, you maybe secretly don't exactly know how it works, and I can't wait to learn. But let's go back a little bit. You've been at this a while. What was sort of the founding story of the company and how you came to the firm? Tell us a little bit about the origins there.
So I've enjoyed a 25-year career starting out in security with Checkpoint Software back in the late 90s, and been privileged to work for some great companies, Cisco, et cetera, and did my first foray into real startup. I was with a software-defined networking company called Viptela back in the early 2010s.
Yeah.
And
pioneer in SDN.
Yeah, and we really looked at SDN from the perspective of not kind of going into the data center and trying to disaggregate the switching business. But really looked at it as an ability to drive innovation in the wide area, and build an overlay capability over traditional MPLS L3 VPNs, over broadband and other types of internet connectivity. And that was really where we started to see the need for segmentation and making segmentation easier in these networks. And it was interesting because one of the themes that we saw with Viptela was we made it very simple to do kind of software-defined segmentation across the wide area, but we would drop off that connection at the L3 DMARC at a customer site, and had a customer say, you make it so simple to build these segments across the WAN, but when we get back into the LAN, we're back to kind of shovels and pickaxes to try and carve up the network and get the right traffic into the right segment.
That's cool.
And so a lot of the thought process behind what we're doing here kind of came out of some of that discussion, and really needing to drive segmentation and more towards a least privileged access model across the local area network as well.
So help us with the concept of microsegment. Is it, maybe you can just give a mental image when somebody's thinking it through. Is it some sort of enclosure around a workload? How should we think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if we think about the kind of the evolution of security controls in the enterprise, perimeter firewalls is really where we started, and we took that same control And we said, hey, let's start kind of carving the network up and put these firewalls, because they're well understood. We understand kind of how to build policy. We put these firewalls into different places in the network. But behind that control, we have free access east-west. And so this concept really started in the data center, where we wanted to understand kind of how workloads interacted with each other and start limiting the access from from a front-end web server to a back-end middleware layer to a database, and really only allow the access that was required for that particular application.
Least privilege.
And least privilege, all right.
Yeah.
Concept that's been around for a long, long time. As we try to implement it into
hard
these
to
systems,
do with workloads,
it's hard to do.
right? Yeah.
But the interesting thing in the data center is we could run a piece of agent software on that server, on that virtual machine, and start looking at the different types of traffic and the different traffic patterns, and then begin to build policy over time. And then we've seen tremendous success. Companies like Illumio and others that have done a great job in taking that kind of agent-based approach. We looked at this problem statement a little bit differently, which is we need a similar type of segmentation capability for other assets that the enterprise owns, for really all types of devices, many of which we can't run an agent on. We can't go in and say, hey, let's put a little shim of software and kind of monitor traffic.
Thingy or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, think about all the different types of kind of unmanaged devices that exist. Right. As I mentioned, we've done a lot in operational technology environments, and for years those networks were essentially air-gapped. The SCADA kind of system was run by a different team, was completely disconnected from the IT network. We have seen really a convergence and sort of an OT-IT boundary now, where we're wanting to be able to reach deeper into that layer, grab data, understand what's going on, take that data out to the cloud edge, do analysis, and then go back and be able to act on that. That has opened up a massive new attack surface. And again, a lot of those OT devices we can't run traditional endpoint agent software on. So we looked at this as how do we solve this problem really in a different way. One, leverage the network as a fabric that's providing that connectivity, and be able to enforce segmentation in the network. But we want to move the policy away from the underlying network constructs, right? I don't want to have to define my segmentation policy in terms of IP addresses and VLANs and subnets and what have you, because the policy is really around the business logic of the application of how the systems are interacting.
Is it hard to snap that into the identity infrastructure that's there? Like, I would imagine if it's a nice clean one, or even a greenfield, you might be rolling into an OT environment where they don't have much, probably easy to do. But if there's like a big mess there, is it step one to maybe clean up some of that identity mess before you do the microsegmentation?
So I think the first step is kind of looking at the different sources of identity that exist, because there's not typically one source. We talk about system of record. We talk about different types of kind of identity databases that exist. And for us, this was one of the first things that we decided to kind of take a slightly different approach, which was, rather than trying to recreate a single source of truth on identity, we wanted to create an ability to bring multiple components of identity in as different attributes or different facets. And then the policies actually can evolve based upon which of those attributes are the most important. And so if you think about user identity is relatively easy to establish. We can integrate with things like Active Directory or Azure AD or Okta. On the device side, it's actually slightly different, and different verticals have sort of different identity sources for some of their OT infrastructure, and we want to be able to bring all those different facets of identity together, and then make it easy to build policy based on that identity. So we work with organizations that have some of their systems kind of their CMDB, if you will, for their OT devices that are homegrown. Some of them are using third-party databases. We're seeing a shift, obviously, towards more cloud-based SaaS delivered. So we integrate with things like ServiceNow, and we can assimilate all those different identity attributes into the policy, and then make it easy to take that policy and apply it back into the network.
How do security administrators manage the policy and sort of maintain some consistency with threat and so on? Is there like a centralized kind of thing, or how do you guys do that?
So we've built a primarily cloud-delivered control plane and policy engine that really does kind of two things. One is we take and understand where different identities exist in the network. Think about, we kind of build a graph database, if you will, of where different assets are, users and devices.
So dependencies and connectivity.
And then we start looking at how those things are interacting. And then we make it easy for the security policy administrators to start to say, there's some big rocks here that we can move, and kind of start to go from a coarser policy in terms of what's allowed to talk to a more fine-grained policy towards a true least privilege or explicit trust policy over time.
So it's sort of a process of watching what's going on and then shrink wrapping the policy down, because most of the time you'd have this very liberal policy, and there may only be a little trickle, almost like ants walking through the Lincoln Tunnel. Like, I don't need that big a mouth. I can really shrink it down.
And that's exactly right.
Am I thinking about that right?
You are, and I think one of the biggest themes that we have is don't try and make the perfect the enemy of the good, right? There are some basic things that we can go in and understand really on day one. A great example. We worked with a healthcare provider in the UK. They run a number of private hospitals. And they said there's just some basic blocking and tackling we'd like to do. We have these UPS systems that are connected to the network, and those UPS systems should only be able to talk externally to their manufacturer for software updates, and to one particular system from an administrative perspective in the data center. They shouldn't be able to interact with any of those systems on the network. Similar things with things like IP video surveillance cameras, badge readers, et cetera. So there's some kind of big rocks that we can start to move from a policy standpoint. And the beautiful thing is, as we define this policy around identity instead of the underlying network construct, if an IP address changes or something changes in the underlying network, the policy is still applied. The policy moves with the identity of the asset, not with the underlying network construct. And so then that allows us to move a lot of the noise out and really start to focus on the signal, which is the more critical systems. What is that least privilege access policy that we want to have in place?
The advantage of that sort of segmented protection around lateral traversal is that things like, I guess, ransomware probably could reduce the risk of ransomware for something like that, like the propagation. Right? Am I that right?
Absolutely, and unfortunately, we've seen, especially the commercially motivated, ransomware actors, really go focus on some of these unmanaged systems, the things that we can't patch and keep up to date, and so there's been a significant increase in the number of attacks in clinical healthcare settings. And you think about all the different things that run in those settings. We've got everything from multi-million-dollar MRI machines to infusion pumps to monitoring systems, and so it's really an attack on the availability of those systems, more so than kind of going after a specific piece of data. But the ability to limit that lateral movement inside the network. It really reduces the attack surface and the impact if there is a successful phishing attempt that ends up infecting a machine, et cetera.
Super interesting. As you were going through those examples, I'm thinking, you guys, it's not really IT or OT, it's all devices here, right? You guys, I don't know if that was the original design goal, but it seems like you covered just about everything at this point.
Well, I think that
the segment,
the arc of integration towards a converged network is long, but it sort of it bends towards IP and Ethernet, right? And so we're definitely
IT
seeing,
eats everything like IP eats everything, right?
And so we're definitely seeing again, a lot of systems that frankly were originally designed to be running in isolated networks that are interconnected, and I think. I've talked to a number of CISOs, who said, we thought that we thought that our OT environment or our industrial control environments were air gapped, and then through COVID realized that air gap was not quite what they thought it was. The number of jump boxes and things that were allowing for remote administration, et cetera, just demonstrated how interconnected some of these systems are. And as we see more and more and more, what we call industrial Internet of Things type devices show up in these environments, they're taking advantage of the proliferation of very, very inexpensive, again, IP-based kind of networking infrastructure to do things, anything from temperature sensors and water level or liquid level sensors. And I want to be able to bring that information back, process it in the cloud, and then make decisions on it. And so those very sort of rigidly controlled environments are now starting to look a lot more like a traditional kind of converged IT network. And so we looked at this and said we've got to come up with a platform that allows us to solve for the managed Windows laptop that's running the current version of the Windows patch that's running the corporate EDR standard. But we also have to be able to deal with the IP video camera that's connected to the network that is vulnerable because of the underlying firmware that's being run, or the programmable logic controller that happens to be attached to the network. We wanted to be able to handle all of those things in a converged policy that was really focused on the business logic from a least privilege standpoint. Again, not the kind of underlying IP address or subnet that a network device happened to be running in.
It's such a good place to be. I mean, that's it strikes me as lining up very well with where most companies are now in the evolution of their network. I think that the segmentation approach is the right architectural construct. So that's great. Congratulations on that. Hey,
thank you.
What do the next few years look like? You guys more of the same, or you think there'll be some big changes?
No, I mean, I think that one of the things that we've really focused on is making this platform really underlay network agnostic. And what do we mean by that? Well, one of the reasons that we've seen such great success early on is we've made this very easy to adopt. We can go in existing networks that are running, existing switching hardware. We run a very, very small container based architecture that registers back to our control plane. We've already been able to demonstrate the continuity of that architecture across multiple generations of switching hardware from Cisco, as an example. So organizations that might be somewhere in the middle of a hardware refresh from, let's say, Catalyst 3850 to Catalyst 9000 infrastructure, they can begin building and implementing least privilege access, microsegmentation policy, and enforcing that policy today, regardless of the state of their hardware refresh. We want to extend that. We've got customers that are driving us to extend that towards other switching platforms as well. So think about now I have a consistent policy running regardless of what's happening in my underlay network. We've extended that to the cloud edge as well. So the same policy engine, same control plane capability. I can go into my AWS VPC or my Azure VNet and extend that microsegmentation capability there. And so we've got customer-driven roadmap around where else we're taking that. One of the large organizations that we're working with from a manufacturing perspective is very excited about now moving a lot of this business logic, this segmentation logic up into a software layer because they are rapidly moving away from traditional wired Ethernet in their process control networks and moving towards private LTE. And so being able to take that segmentation logic and have that persist as they go through and refresh the underlying network infrastructure becomes critically important. So we're excited to see where the customers are driving us from that standpoint. The other thing that we're really excited about and starting to invest even more heavily in is making it easier to build and maintain these least privilege access policies.
Yeah.
So we talked about look, this doesn't have to be perfect on day one, and I think that there's been this sort of over-rotation with all of the discussion of zero trust. I have to go from essentially an implicit trust, wide open environment towards zero trust overnight. That's not practical for most organizations. What is practical is to start moving more and more and more things towards a more explicit trust model. And we think that as we see how these policies are coming together in different organizations, a tremendous amount of metadata around what those policies need to look like, and there is commonality. So we can actually start to make some recommendations on what are those big rocks that we can move out of the way, and then get very, very focused in terms of the policy administration
That's
effort.
fantastic. Well, I'm guessing that people watching, if they do cloud, if they do network, if they do IT, they do security, probably should be taking a look at what you guys are doing at Elicity. Hey, if people are interested, is the website the right place? What's your favorite place to have people
Absolutely,
contact
we've got a tremendous amount of content available. www.elicity.com. Everything from kind of white paper solution briefs to a tremendous amount of video content.
That's good.
And again, I think all of this comes down to the customer case studies, and we've got some great information from customers on how they are moving towards accomplishing their segmentation, their least privileged access goals, leveraging the power of our platform.
Well, I want to congratulate you on so much success. It's not a big surprise given what you've been doing. On behalf of our team at Tag Cyber and people watching, thanks for stopping by and sharing. We all learned so much today.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Very nice to see you. And for everyone else, we'll see you next time.